Prince William froze when the guard whispered one sentence behind palace walls: emotional royal story. Outside, the garden was serene, dew glistening on the neatly trimmed hedges and the roses slowly opening their petals to the first light of the day. Inside, the palace was quiet, almost unusually so, with only the soft echo of footsteps on marble floors. It was the kind of morning that made one pause, take a deep breath, and feel both the weight and beauty of a place so filled with tradition. Prince William moved through the corridors with a measured pace. Despite the grandeur surrounding him, he carried himself with a quiet humility, a gentle reminder that behind the titles and the formalities, he was still a man with thoughts, feelings, and moments of private reflection. Today, as on most mornings, he was awake before the palace stirred into its usual rhythm. There was something comforting about the calm before the bustle, a chance to think and to simply be himself, even if only for a short while. He paused near a tall window, resting a hand lightly on the polished sill, and gazed out over the gardens. The distant sound of a bird's wings flapping against the morning air caught his attention, and he watched as it took off from a branch and soared across the courtyard. For a moment, he allowed himself to be lost in the simplicity of that small scene, feeling a rare sense of peace. But as always, the serenity was paired with a familiar shadow of responsibility, a gentle but persistent reminder of the duties awaiting him. Even as a prince, William often found himself reflecting on the weight of expectation. His life had been mapped out almost from the moment of his birth. Every action, every appearance, every word spoken in public carried significance far beyond what most people experienced. And yet, for all the grandeur and history, there were private moments like this, rare moments, where he could feel the human side of his own life, unburdened if only temporarily. He thought about the times when the world seemed so far away, when he could walk among the people unnoticed, blending in with everyday life, and just exist without the eyes of millions upon him. As he turned away from the window, he caught sight of a portrait hanging along the corridor, a solemn painting of a past monarch whose eyes seemed to follow him. William had walked these halls countless times, past portraits and statues, but there was always a quiet sense of connection to those who had come before him. Their lives, filled with duty, sacrifice, and moments of joy and sorrow, somehow felt intertwined with his own. He wondered if they, too, had ever paused like this, allowing themselves a private breath in the midst of all the grandeur. The palace itself seemed alive, in subtle ways. The faint clatter of silverware being polished in the kitchen, the low hum of servants going about their morning routines, the soft shuffle of guards patrolling the corridors. It was a living organism, one that moved with precision yet carried the warmth of familiarity. William appreciated these rhythms. They reminded him that even in a life of royal protocol, there was a heartbeat of normalcy, small pieces of everyday life hidden beneath the layers of tradition. He continued walking, his footsteps echoing softly against the marble. As he passed a grand archway leading toward the private quarters, he noticed a pair of guards standing rigid and still, their faces set in calm yet attentive expressions. Their presence was a constant in the palace, a reminder of both protection and ceremony. But today, there was something unusual in the quiet tension of the hall, something that made the air feel heavier, as if the palace itself were holding its breath. William approached the guards with a polite nod. They returned his gesture with disciplined precision. He observed them for a moment, taking in the slight twitch of a hand, the way their eyes flickered with alertness even in stillness. It was fascinating to him, this constant balancing act they performed, alert yet calm, strong yet controlled. He often thought about the stories they could tell, the experiences they had witnessed behind these walls, most of which remained unknown to the public. The palace was full of secrets, some small, some grand, and some that carried the weight of history itself. As he continued his walk, his mind wandered to thoughts of his family. The images of his children, their laughter and curiosity, brought a small smile to his face. There was innocence and joy in their world that seemed so distant from the structured life of royalty he had inherited. At times, he longed for the simplicity of being just a father and a husband, without titles, without expectation, without the weight of centuries of history pressing down. And yet, he also knew that his position allowed him to provide and protect in ways others could not, a responsibility that both grounded and burdened him in equal measure. The sound of a distant door opening pulled him from his thoughts. A servant moved quietly along the corridor, carrying a tray of morning tea. William acknowledged the presence with a polite smile, and she returned it with a discreet nod, disappearing as quietly as she had arrived. The palace moved in rhythms both seen and unseen, and William had come to notice the subtle orchestration that made it all function so seamlessly. Even small gestures, quiet movements, and soft sounds contributed to the palace's living atmosphere, and he found comfort in these small details. He finally reached a corner near one of the quieter wings, an area he often used when he needed to collect his thoughts. Here, the air was cooler, and the faint scent of polished wood and old stone lingered, grounding him in the tangible reality of the place. He leaned lightly against the wall, letting the quiet embrace him for a moment. Here, away from the public eye, away from expectations, he could almost forget the weight of his title, almost feel like just a man among the corridors of history. As he stood there, a soft breeze drifted in through a slightly ajar window, carrying the faint scent of the gardens outside. He closed his eyes briefly, letting the world slow down. In moments like this, he could almost pretend that time belonged solely to him, that the palace itself had paused to grant him a few minutes of respite. The grandeur, the history, the duty, all of it existed, but in this corner he found a pocket of quiet that belonged entirely to him. Yet even in these quiet moments, there was an underlying tension. William knew that life at the palace was never truly free of expectation. Every step he took, every choice he made, rippled outward, touching lives, shaping perceptions, and influencing decisions far beyond these walls. And so he savored the stillness, aware that it was fleeting, knowing that soon the day would awaken in full, and with it, the endless duties, appearances, and responsibilities that awaited him. He straightened, pushing back the brief wave of reflection, and began walking again, the echo of his footsteps once more filling the corridor. Each step felt purposeful, yet he allowed himself a small indulgence, a moment of observation, a lingering glance at the ornate tapestries, a breath of air from the open windows. Even in a life so structured, there were spaces to feel, to notice, to quietly appreciate the world in its simplest forms. Little did he know that this morning, serene and ordinary as it seemed, would soon hold a moment that would make him freeze in a way he had never expected. A moment that would ripple through his thoughts, his emotions, and perhaps even his understanding of the life he had inherited. But for now he walked the halls, immersed in the gentle rhythm of the palace, the quiet before the day truly began, unaware that a single whisper, carried through the silence of these historic walls, was waiting just ahead. As Prince William moved further down the quiet corridor, the palace seemed to hold its breath. Every echo of his footsteps felt amplified against the high, ornate ceilings, bouncing softly back to him in gentle repetitions. He had almost reached a secluded corner near one of the lesser-used wings, a place where the walls were older and the shadows deeper. The polished marble gave way to a softer stone floor, one that had witnessed the secret comings and goings of generations of royals and staff. It was here, in this hidden part of the palace, that he often paused to reflect, away from the watchful eyes of the public and the constant hum of ceremony. A pair of guards stood silently at the entrance to a narrow hallway, perfectly still as if frozen in time. Their uniforms were crisp, immaculate and almost ceremonial in appearance, yet their presence carried a weight far beyond mere decoration. William nodded politely as he passed, accustomed to their quiet vigilance. But then something caught his attention, a subtle movement, a slight shift in stance, as if one of the guards had noticed something only he could perceive. Before he could adjust his pace, the guard leaned slightly toward him, close enough that William could feel the faint warmth of another human presence in the otherwise cold corridor. And then, almost impossibly quietly, the guard whispered a single sentence. It was not loud, not dramatic, but it carried a weight that seemed to echo through the very walls around them. The words were simple, yet they struck William with an intensity that he was not prepared for. He froze immediately, a shiver running down his spine. His mind tried to process what had just been said, but it felt as though the words were not merely heard, they were absorbed, lodging themselves deep within him. The quiet of the corridor made the whisper even more surreal. It was as if the palace itself had conspired to amplify its importance, holding him in place, insisting that he hear and feel every syllable. William's heart began to beat faster, not in panic but in the sharp clarity of sudden awareness. There was something about the sentence, something personal, something intimate, that seemed to bypass the normal layers of thought and reach straight into his emotions. It hinted at a truth, a secret, or perhaps a memory that had been tucked away, hidden beneath layers of daily routine, public appearances, and the endless formalities of royal life. He stood frozen, the polished floor beneath him feeling both solid and unreal at the same time. The guard, as if sensing the gravity of his reaction, returned to perfect stillness, eyes straight ahead, posture impeccable. There was no further explanation, no follow-up, just the lingering weight of the single whispered sentence hanging between them. William's mind raced. He tried to place the words to understand their context, but it was like trying to catch smoke with bare hands. Every possibility twisted and turned in his thoughts. Was it something about the palace, something about the family, or perhaps a warning? The whisper had been subtle yet urgent, a delicate balance of mystery and importance that made it impossible to ignore. He felt a curious mixture of fear and fascination. Fear, because the unknown often carried consequences. Fascination, because even in his life of careful planning and strict routines, there were still moments that could surprise him so profoundly. For a few minutes, he remained rooted to the spot, absorbing the impact of what he had heard. The corridors, so familiar, now felt charged with new meaning. Shadows seemed longer, the echo of his own heartbeat louder, and even the soft rustle of air through the palace felt significant. It was a strange sensation, both disorienting and awakening. He realized that a single, simple sentence could carry far more power than any elaborate speech, any command, any formal announcement he had ever encountered. He finally forced himself to move, each step deliberate, cautious, as if the floor itself might reveal hidden truths beneath his feet. The whisper replayed in his mind, over and over, each repetition peeling back a new layer of curiosity, each iteration highlighting emotions he had rarely allowed himself to feel so openly. A sense of urgency began to build within him, not panic, but a deep, compelling need to understand. He needed context, clarity, a way to connect the whisper to his life and the history of the palace around him. William sought refuge in the quiet of a nearby sitting room, a place where heavy curtains softened the sunlight and the furniture seemed almost impervious to time. He sat down, resting his elbows on his knees, hands clasped together, and allowed himself to think. His mind drifted through memories of his childhood, of moments in the palace both public and private. Images of his parents, the laughter of his younger self, the lessons learned in those corridors. It all seemed to converge with the whispered words, though he could not yet understand why. He remembered the countless times he had walked these same halls, often unnoticed, sometimes under the weight of expectation, sometimes in the freedom of anonymity. Each step he had taken seemed insignificant at the time, yet now, in light of the whisper, every corridor, every door, every shadow seemed imbued with hidden significance. It was as though the palace had layers he had never fully perceived, secrets waiting patiently for the right moment to reveal themselves. Hours passed unnoticed. William remained in that room, alone with the whisper in his mind. The day outside had brightened, the sun casting warm light across the gardens. Yet inside, he was trapped in a private world of contemplation. The palace's usual rhythm, the quiet footsteps of servants, the distant clatter of silver, the soft murmur of voices, continued around him, but he was isolated in a bubble of thought. The weight of the whisper had shifted something inside him, igniting questions he had long ignored and emotions he had carefully set aside. He tried to rationalize the situation. Perhaps it was a warning, something the guard had been instructed to deliver in secrecy. Or maybe it was a revelation, a fragment of truth that had waited for him to be ready. Each possibility carried a different weight, a different emotional resonance. And yet, no matter how he turned it over in his mind, the whisper remained just beyond full comprehension, teasing the edge of understanding without ever yielding entirely. As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the room, William felt a strange mixture of anticipation and trepidation. The palace, in its quiet majesty, seemed almost alive, holding its breath alongside him. He realized in a moment of clarity that this single sentence had accomplished something remarkable. It had interrupted the flow of his carefully structured life, demanding attention, reflection, and introspection. It was rare for a moment of such significance to occur without ceremony or fanfare, and yet here it was, quietly reshaping the contours of his day, his thoughts, and perhaps even his understanding of himself. Finally, with a deep, measured breath, he rose from the chair, feeling the weight of the whisper settle into his consciousness like a seed planted in fertile soil. He knew that he could not ignore it, that he could not simply continue with his routine as if nothing had happened. Something had shifted, an invisible thread had been tugged, and he felt compelled to follow it, to unravel the mystery, to discover the truth behind those carefully chosen words. William left the sitting room, moving through the palace with renewed purpose. Every familiar corridor now seemed charged with meaning, every statue, every portrait, every familiar detail calling for closer observation. He noticed things he had walked past countless times but never truly seen: the slight tilt of a painting, the worn edges of a carpet, the faint traces of conversation in a room long quiet. Each detail seemed to whisper secrets, echoing the guard's message in ways he could not yet fully decipher. He passed through the grand halls, the echoes of his footsteps blending with the quiet hum of palace life. Servants moved efficiently, unaware of the emotional storm swirling within him. Guards remained vigilant, their eyes sharp and attentive, yet they could not perceive the inner turmoil that gripped the young prince. And all the while, the whispered words lingered, persistent, pressing, demanding that he seek understanding. As he reached another secluded corner, William paused again. He pressed a hand to the cool stone wall, grounding himself, and let the palace's quiet strength wash over him. It was a place of history, of duty, of centuries of human experience. And yet, in this moment, it was also a place of mystery, a place where a single whispered sentence could resonate with power far beyond what anyone might expect. The prince knew, with a deep and undeniable certainty, that his day, and perhaps even his life, would never be quite the same. The whisper had opened a door, and he had glimpsed the world beyond it, a world filled with secrets, emotions, and truths he had yet to understand. And as he walked toward the heart of the palace, he carried the echo of that whisper with him, a quiet, invisible companion that would guide his steps and shape his journey in ways he could not yet imagine. Prince William found himself wandering the quiet corridors of Buckingham Palace long after the initial shock of the guard's whisper had settled into a persistent echo in his mind. The words repeated themselves over and over, twisting and turning in his thoughts, never fully clear yet impossible to ignore. He had tried to continue with his day, attempted to focus on the responsibilities awaiting him, yet his mind refused to cooperate. Every familiar sound, every familiar sight, now seemed layered with new meaning, as if the palace itself had become a mirror reflecting truths he had not yet understood. He walked past the grand portraits of past monarchs, their painted eyes following him as they always did, but today their gazes seemed more intense, almost questioning. William wondered if the whispers of history were always this close, waiting for the right moment to make themselves known. He imagined the lives these figures had led, filled with duty, sacrifice, moments of happiness and moments of quiet sorrow, and he felt an odd kinship with them. It was as though the palace, with all its grandeur and weight, was reminding him that even those who seemed untouchable carried their own private struggles. Eventually, he arrived at a small, secluded sitting room, a space he had often used to retreat from the endless attention of the public and the palace staff. The room was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of afternoon light filtering through heavy curtains. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and old books, and the furniture, though elegant, seemed almost timeless. Here, William allowed himself to sit, to breathe, and to finally confront the emotions that had been quietly building since the whisper. He pressed his hands against his face for a moment, trying to steady the whirlwind of feelings swirling inside him. Fear, confusion, curiosity, and a strange sort of awe all mixed together, creating a weight he had rarely experienced in his daily life. It was disorienting, yet there was a strange clarity in the chaos. He realized that the whisper had touched a part of him he rarely acknowledged, a part of himself that yearned for understanding, for connection, for truth. His thoughts drifted back to his family. Images of his parents flashed through his mind, his father's quiet strength, his mother's warmth and charm, and the love they had both tried to give him even amidst the pressures of royal life. He remembered moments of childhood laughter, the comfort of familiar voices, and even the quieter, sadder memories of lessons learned the hard way. The whisper seemed somehow connected to these memories, as if it had reached through time to remind him of the depth of his own life and the emotions he had carried silently for so long. William's mind also turned to his own family now, his wife and children, their laughter, their innocence, and their curiosity. He realized that the weight of his responsibilities often kept him from fully appreciating these moments, from allowing himself to be completely present. The whisper, though mysterious and unsettling, had forced him to pause and reflect, to acknowledge feelings he had not allowed himself to feel openly. It was both unsettling and deeply necessary, a gentle push toward introspection he had resisted for far too long. He thought about the guards, those silent sentinels of the palace who moved through life with a quiet discipline that he had always admired. How many secrets did they carry? How many truths were hidden behind their stoic expressions? The whisper had come from one of them, a single, fleeting interaction that had altered the course of his thoughts for the entire day. It was a reminder that even the smallest gestures, the briefest words, could carry enormous significance, changing perspectives in ways that nothing else could. As the afternoon sunlight began to fade, casting longer shadows across the room, William allowed himself to be vulnerable in a way he rarely permitted. He realized that his life, though privileged and full of opportunity, was also constrained by expectation, tradition, and a constant awareness of the public eye. Moments like these, quiet moments where he could feel and think freely, were rare. And yet, they were essential. They reminded him that beneath the title, beneath the duties, beneath the expectations, he was still a man, a human being capable of fear, wonder, curiosity, and deep emotion. He closed his eyes and let the silence of the room envelop him. The whisper seemed to echo even louder now, not as a voice in the hall, but as a presence in his mind. Each word carried layers of meaning he had not yet unraveled, like a puzzle waiting for patience, attention, and courage. He realized that the palace itself had always been a place of hidden stories, of quiet revelations, and that this whisper was simply another thread in the tapestry of its long history. His thoughts returned again to the nature of secrets and truth. He understood, in a way he hadn't before, that the most powerful moments in life were often quiet, subtle, and deeply personal. Grand speeches, public appearances, and ceremonial acts could inspire or impress, but a single whispered sentence, delivered in the right place, at the right time, could shake the very foundation of a person's understanding of themselves and their world. William felt both awe and gratitude for having experienced such a moment, even though its full meaning remained just beyond his reach. He also felt a growing sense of responsibility. The whisper was not just a private message. It carried a weight, a significance that demanded reflection and perhaps action. He could not ignore it, dismiss it, or pretend it had never happened. The palace, with all its history and majesty, had presented him with a challenge, a call to understand something hidden, something personal, something essential. He felt the quiet urgency to seek answers, to connect the whisper to the stories of his past, and to the life he was living now. As evening approached, the palace took on a softer, almost magical quality. The fading sunlight cast long patterns across the floor, and the air seemed to hum with a quiet energy. William moved slowly through the halls, aware of every sound, every movement, every shadow. It was as if the walls themselves were guiding him, offering subtle clues, encouraging him to notice what he had never noticed before. The whisper had opened a door, and he could not turn back. He could only step forward cautiously, thoughtfully, and with a deep sense of respect for the journey he had been set upon. He paused near a window overlooking the palace gardens. The flowers, now bathed in the golden glow of evening, seemed almost to shimmer, as if holding secrets of their own. He thought about the continuity of life, the passage of time, the generations of people who had walked these paths, cared for these gardens, and carried the stories of their lives through these halls. The whisper was a continuation of that legacy, a small but profound thread in the endless story of the palace and the people who lived within it. William stayed there for a long while, watching the gardens and listening to the quiet sounds of the evening. The whisper was still with him, persistent and patient, urging him to reflect, to understand, to connect the dots between the past and the present. He realized that this was not just a fleeting moment of curiosity. It was an invitation to growth, to self-discovery, to a deeper understanding of the life he had been given. And he felt a mixture of apprehension and anticipation, knowing that the answers he sought would not come easily, but would require patience, courage, and careful observation. Finally, he turned away from the window and began to walk again, this time with a sense of purpose. Each step felt deliberate, measured, yet filled with a quiet determination. He knew that he could not ignore the impact of the whisper, that it had awakened something inside him that could not be silenced. It had revealed a vulnerability, yes, but also an opportunity, a chance to see the palace, his family, and even himself in a new and deeper way. As he moved through the corridors, William understood that the path ahead would be both challenging and enlightening. The whisper had planted a seed, and it was his responsibility to nurture it, to follow where it led, and to discover the truths it hinted at. He did not yet know what those truths were, or how they would change him, but he felt a quiet courage growing inside him. The palace, with all its history, its beauty, and its secrets, had given him a moment of awakening, and he was determined to honor it. The evening deepened, and the palace began its slow transition into night. The guards patrolled their posts, The staff completed their tasks with quiet efficiency, and the halls seemed to settle into a gentle rhythm. William, however, remained restless, energized by the whisper and the questions it had raised. He knew that tomorrow would bring new opportunities to seek understanding, to observe, to connect, and to discover. But for now, he allowed himself a moment to simply feel, to absorb the emotions stirred within him, and to prepare for the journey that lay ahead. In the quiet of the palace, Prince William felt both humbled and inspired. The whisper had reminded him that even in a life of privilege and responsibility, there was always room for wonder, for reflection, and for emotional growth. It had reminded him that every moment, no matter how small or fleeting, could carry profound significance. And as he finally retired to his private chambers, he carried with him the lingering echo of that single sentence, a whisper that had already begun to shape his thoughts, his feelings, and the path he would follow in the days to come. The following morning, Prince William awoke, with the whisper still lingering in his mind, persistent and insistent, as though it had taken residence in the quiet corners of his thoughts. He dressed carefully, not out of ceremony but out of habit, the familiar routine offering a small sense of normalcy. Yet, beneath the surface, a restless energy hummed through him. He could not ignore the sentence that had frozen him in the corridor the day before. It had awakened questions that demanded attention and action. He began his day with a quiet walk through the palace halls, taking a route he had never fully appreciated before. Each corridor, each painting, each statue seemed to hold secrets just waiting to be discovered. William moved deliberately, observing the subtle details, the worn edges of carpets in the less traveled wings, the small inscriptions on plaques that chronicled the lives of those who had served the palace for decades, and the faint creaks in the floorboards that spoke of countless footsteps over centuries. It was as if the palace itself had become a living map, guiding him toward the answers he sought. His first step was to consult the palace aides he trusted most. He sought out the head librarian, a woman who had spent decades among the archives and records, quietly preserving the history of the royal family. She greeted him with a polite bow, her eyes curious but respectful, sensing that something unusual had prompted his visit. William explained, as carefully as he could, that he had encountered a message, a whisper that he could not forget, and that he hoped to understand its meaning. He did not give details of the words themselves, knowing their intimacy, but he asked her to guide him through the records, the letters, and the history that might illuminate a hidden truth. They moved through the library together, rows of books and documents towering on either side, the scent of old paper and polished wood filling the air. William ran his hands lightly along the spines of leather-bound volumes, feeling a strange connection to the countless stories held within. He marveled at how much history was preserved in silence, waiting for the right moment to speak. The librarian showed him letters between family members, notes from previous monarchs, and even private journals that revealed thoughts and feelings rarely made public. Each document carried its own weight, its own echoes of human emotion, and William felt a growing awareness of how personal history could resonate across generations. As they examined the records, William noticed small patterns, recurring themes of love, responsibility, secrecy, and protection. Some letters spoke of difficult decisions made in private, moments of doubt hidden beneath public confidence, and struggles that were never known to the outside world. He realized that the whisper he had heard was not an isolated occurrence. It was part of a long tradition of messages carried quietly, moments that could alter perception and understanding without the fanfare of ceremony or proclamation. Encouraged by these discoveries, William decided to visit the palace archives, a place even more hidden, filled with documents that detailed the most private moments of past generations. The archives were dimly lit, the air cool and still, and the shelves seemed almost endless. He felt a thrill of anticipation, as if each file, each folder, held a potential key to understanding the mystery of the whisper. He handled the documents carefully, aware that they were fragile and precious, yet eager to uncover any connection that might illuminate the meaning behind the guard's words. Hours passed as he worked, and yet no clear answer emerged. Still, each discovery seemed to deepen the mystery, layering new questions over old ones. William felt a mix of frustration and fascination. He realized that understanding the whisper would not be easy. It required patience, careful attention, and a willingness to confront emotions he had long set aside. But he also understood that this journey was necessary, not only to uncover a hidden truth but to better understand himself, his family, and the history he carried forward. By late afternoon, he took a break, walking once more through the palace gardens. The sunlight was softer now, casting long shadows and bathing the flowers in a warm glow. He paused by a small fountain, listening to the gentle trickle of water and watching the ripples spread across the surface. In this quiet, natural space, he allowed his mind to wander freely. He thought about the guard who had whispered the sentence, imagining what he must have felt, carrying a message that could alter a prince's thoughts in an instant. It occurred to him that sometimes the smallest, simplest acts could carry extraordinary significance. As he reflected, he realized that the whisper had done more than confuse him or spark curiosity. It had ignited a sense of urgency to understand, a desire to connect the present with the past, and to reconcile the secrets of history with the reality of his own life. He began to see the palace not just as a place of grandeur and tradition, but as a living archive of human experience, a repository of emotions, choices, and moments that had shaped generations. Determined to uncover the truth, he returned to the guards he had observed the day before. This time, he approached with intention, not just passing politely but observing, listening, and learning. He realized that every member of the palace staff, from the servants to the guards, carried a wealth of knowledge and insight, some of it intentionally hidden, some of it simply observed over years of quiet duty. He spoke carefully, asking questions, learning about traditions, long-standing practices, and the small rituals that governed life behind the palace walls. Each answer provided a fragment of understanding, each story a piece of the puzzle. The guard who had whispered the message remained enigmatic, offering no further explanation, yet William sensed a quiet guidance in his presence. It was as if the guard had been waiting for the prince to take responsibility for seeking the truth, to actively engage rather than passively receive information. The lesson was subtle but clear. Some truths were not simply handed over, they were earned, discovered through observation, patience, and thoughtful reflection. By evening, William had pieced together a partial understanding. He realized that the whisper connected not only to a specific secret, but also to the broader theme of trust, loyalty, and family responsibility that had always defined the palace and the royal lineage. The sentence had been a gentle nudge, a reminder that even in a life of privilege, there were moments of vulnerability, moments of learning, and moments when paying attention to small details could lead to profound understanding. He spent the night reviewing notes he had taken throughout the day, carefully organizing observations, connections, and questions. The whisper had sparked something deeper than curiosity. It had opened a door to introspection, to learning about himself, his family, and the hidden layers of the palace that he had never fully explored. Every discovery felt like a conversation with history, a dialogue with those who had come before, and a reminder that life, even in a palace, was filled with moments that demanded presence, attention, and emotional awareness. As midnight approached, he finally allowed himself a moment of rest. He lay in his chambers, staring at the ceiling, reflecting on the day's discoveries and the journey ahead. The whisper still lingered, not as a source of confusion or fear, but as a guiding presence, urging him to continue seeking, learning, and understanding. He knew that the path would not be easy, that the answers he sought would require courage, patience, and an openness to emotion he had not always allowed himself to feel. Yet, for the first time in many days, he felt a sense of clarity. The whisper, brief and subtle as it had been, had shifted something fundamental within him. It had reminded him that even in a life of expectation, privilege, and routine, there was always room for wonder, discovery, and emotional growth. The palace, with all its history, beauty, and secrets, had become more than a residence. It had become a teacher, a guide, and a source of insight into both the past and the present. In the quiet of the night, William made a silent promise to himself. He would follow the thread the whisper had started, carefully, thoughtfully, and with respect for the lives and stories it connected him to. He would seek understanding not only of the words themselves, but of the larger truths they hinted at, truths about family, loyalty, history, and the responsibilities he carried. And in doing so, he would honor the palace, the people within it, and the hidden lessons of generations that had walked these halls before him. With that resolve, he finally drifted into sleep, the whisper lingering gently in his mind like a quiet companion, guiding him toward the discoveries yet to come. He knew that tomorrow and the days beyond would be filled with questions, insights, and revelations. But he also knew that he was ready, strengthened by curiosity, reflection, and a growing understanding of the deep, subtle power of a single whispered truth. The morning sun filtered softly through the tall windows of Buckingham Palace, casting a gentle glow over the corridors that Prince William now walked with quiet determination. The whisper that had haunted him for days was no longer just a puzzling echo in his mind. It had become a thread, pulling him forward toward understanding. Today, he told himself, he would uncover the meaning behind those words, no matter how long it took or how complex the journey might be. He started by revisiting the palace archives, the rooms filled with centuries of documents, letters, and records that held the secrets of generations. As he moved among the shelves, he felt a deep respect for the lives contained within these papers, the choices, the sacrifices, the moments of joy and sorrow, all preserved in careful writing. Each document seemed to whisper its own story, and William approached them not just as a prince, but as a human being seeking connection, understanding, and truth. His first discoveries were small but significant. He found letters between his parents that revealed private struggles, moments of doubt, and quiet expressions of love that had never been shared publicly. Reading them, he felt a deep sense of intimacy, as though the whisper had guided him to a window into the hearts of those who had shaped his life. He understood that family, even within the constraints of royal duty, was filled with both beauty and complexity, moments of vulnerability and unspoken truths that carried immense emotional weight. As he continued, William came across notes and records that hinted at traditions and practices that had been quietly maintained over generations, messages delivered subtly, secrets preserved for those who were patient enough to seek them. He realized that the guard's whisper was part of this delicate web, a reminder that some truths were not meant to be shouted from the rooftops, but revealed softly, at the right moment, to the right person. It was a lesson in patience, attention, and respect for the weight of history. Hours passed, yet the sense of urgency remained, driving him to explore deeper. He spoke again with the guards, observing their routines, listening to their stories, and learning about their experiences in the palace. They were not just protectors of walls and doors. They were keepers of knowledge, witnesses to countless private moments, and silent participants in the unfolding of history. One guard, who had been stationed at the corner where the whisper had occurred, spoke carefully about loyalty, trust, and the importance of observing the small details that often carried the greatest meaning. William sensed that this guard, without saying much, had been guiding him toward the realization that understanding required active participation and an open heart. By late afternoon, a pattern began to emerge. The whisper was connected not to a single event, but to a series of truths, moments of personal courage, acts of kindness, decisions made in love, and sacrifices taken quietly. William saw how these moments had shaped the lives of those before him, and he began to understand how they had also shaped him. The whisper had acted as a catalyst, prompting him to reflect, observe, and connect threads that had previously seemed unrelated. He sat once more in the quiet sitting room, letting the afternoon light wash over him as he reviewed his notes and thoughts. For the first time, he felt a profound clarity. The whisper had not been a warning, nor a mystery meant to confuse him. It had been an invitation. An invitation to look deeper, to feel more fully, and to understand the delicate balance of duty, love, and family that defined his life. He realized that even the smallest gestures, the quietest words, could carry lessons powerful enough to reshape perspective, touch the heart, and guide choices. As evening approached, William decided to share his reflections with those closest to him in the palace. He spoke with the head librarian and a few trusted aides, explaining what he had learned, what he had observed, and what he now understood about the whisper and its significance. They listened carefully, offering insights and confirmations, yet always allowing him the space to arrive at his own conclusions. It was a collaborative discovery, a blending of history, observation, and personal reflection, and it left William feeling deeply connected to the living, breathing story of the palace and the people within it. That night, after the palace had quieted and most of the staff had retired to their own chambers, William took a solitary walk along the corridor where the whisper had first occurred. The shadows were long, and the air was cool and still. He stopped at the exact spot, closing his eyes and recalling the words that had set this journey in motion. And then, with a sense of calm he had not felt in days, he understood fully. The whisper had been a reminder that life, even within the strict structures of royalty, was rich with unseen truths, hidden emotions, and opportunities for growth. It was not a revelation of scandal or danger, nor was it a secret that could disrupt the palace or his family. Instead, it was profoundly personal, speaking to his own need to observe more carefully, feel more deeply, and recognize the quiet but powerful threads that connected past, present, and future. It reminded him that even in a life governed by protocol, ceremony, and expectation, there was room for human connection, for reflection, and for emotional awareness. He thought of his children and his wife, feeling a renewed sense of gratitude and responsibility. He understood that part of his role as a father and a husband was to notice, to listen, and to cherish the small moments, the fleeting gestures, and the whispers that carried lessons more valuable than any formal speech. The palace, with all its history and grandeur, had provided him with a profound lesson. Attention, patience, and emotional openness were as important as duty, tradition, and public service. As he walked through the halls, he also reflected on the guards who had been his silent guides, the staff who had preserved the history of the palace, and the many generations of his family who had walked these same paths. Each of them had contributed to the living story of the palace, often without recognition, often in quiet devotion. And now, through the whisper and his journey of discovery, William felt a connection not just to the past, but to the ongoing story of duty, loyalty, and love that defined his life and the lives of those around him. Finally, he returned to his private chambers, the whisper now transformed from a source of mystery to a guiding presence. He felt a sense of peace, a quiet satisfaction, and an emotional clarity that had been missing in the days before. He realized that the most meaningful truths were often subtle, hidden in quiet moments, and waiting for someone willing to notice, reflect, and embrace them fully. The whisper had done more than spark curiosity. It had prompted personal growth, self-awareness, and a deeper appreciation for the intricate tapestry of life within the palace. Before retiring for the night, William paused by a window overlooking the palace gardens. The moonlight bathed the flowers and pathways in a soft, silver glow, and the air was filled with the gentle sounds of the night, leaves rustling, distant footsteps, and the quiet hum of life continuing within and beyond the palace walls. He felt connected, not just to the physical space of the palace, but to the generations of people who had lived, loved, and worked within it. He understood that the whisper was part of this continuum, a small but profound thread in the endless story of human experience. He took a deep breath, letting the night air fill him with calm and clarity. The journey prompted by the whisper had come to an end, but its lessons would remain with him forever. Attention to detail, emotional openness, patience, and reflection. These were the qualities that would guide him not only as a prince but as a husband, a father, and a human being navigating the complexities of life. The palace had given him a gift, quietly and unobtrusively, and he intended to honor it by carrying the wisdom forward into each day, each decision, and each interaction. Finally, Prince William settled into bed, feeling a quiet sense of fulfillment and emotional resolution. The whisper that had frozen him in place days before was no longer a source of tension or uncertainty. It had become a gentle, guiding presence, reminding him of the depth of human connection, the importance of awareness, and the power of subtle truths. He closed his eyes, at peace with the knowledge that the journey of discovery had strengthened him, deepened his understanding, and reminded him of the beauty, complexity, and responsibility of the life he had been given. And as he drifted into sleep, the palace rested with him, the halls silent yet full of quiet energy, the past and present woven together in a living story that would continue to unfold, carrying the lessons of a single whispered sentence into the days, months, and years to come.